from thebiblegeek.org.
No, his mind is not for rent to any god or government.
Well, it's the Bible Geek, as always, or at least somebody doing a pretty good imitation of him. Though why anyone would do that is up for grabs. I thought we'd deal with question 2637, which comes from Dave 644. And this was entitled Jesus Myth in Mark. Dear Bob, all through the Gospel of Mark, Mark is explaining to the reader why you may not have heard of the historical Jesus. At the baptism, God speaks only to Jesus. When he cures a blind man, he tells him to tell no one. When he drives out demons, he forbids them from revealing him. At the empty tomb, the women tell no one. It would appear that he knows it is a myth that he is bringing to light. Is there anywhere else in the New Testament where the fact that it is a myth is so apparent? Well, offhand, I can think of a couple of places that seem to me to rub your nose in it. One of them is in the Last Supper in John, where Jesus is made to say, you know, guys, I have many other things to tell you, but you're just not ready for them now. But don't worry, I will send the Spirit of truth, and he will come and take from mine and bring it to you, and bring all things to your remembrance, and so on. Now, if that isn't a dead giveaway, that what you are reading in the Gospel of John, which sounds so different from the other Gospels, is that supplementary teaching being channeled by the evangelist himself, I don't know what is. That's just almost a bald-faced admission of how the thing is fictive work in our sense. I mean, I have no doubt that the evangelist believed himself to be inspired prophetically or whatever, but for us, I mean, technically that's fictive because it's not actually reporting what Jesus was saying. Another one is 2 Peter, which protests too much. The author says, now look, we weren't devising clever myths when we described, for example, the Transfiguration and so on. We were there. We heard the voice from heaven say this and that. I just think that's, right, I got you. Yeah, you weren't devising clever myths. Sure, man, that's ticket. But the thing with the secretive business in Mark, that's been dealt with in various ways, and perhaps the classic one is the theory of Wilhelm Wrede in his book called The Messianic Secret. And Wrede's theory was that the early Christians in Mark's time were divided between two different Christologies. One of them held that Jesus had become the Messiah as of his resurrection. The other held that no, he was already the Messiah, at least from baptism on. Both are what would later be called adoptionistic Christologies, and the difference between them was Jesus to be considered the Messiah during his public ministry? Was what he was doing, special though it was necessarily messianic? Now, why did some people say it was? Some said it wasn't. Well, it's not clear that there was any Jewish expectation of a Messiah that would be an itinerant healer and preacher. And that makes you wonder then if the earlier view was not that this righteous man, Jesus, was declared Messiah by virtue of the resurrection of the dead, and that he will shortly return to do the work of a Messiah, liberating Israel, etc. But famously, it did not happen. There was no second coming, and so people began to say not that Jesus was a false Messiah, but that it was already doing the work of a Messiah in the one coming they had on hand, the one that had already happened. Now, of course, this all assumes there was a historical Jesus. It might be compatible in some way with some twisting of sense with the Christ myth, but nonetheless, Wrede, though he assumed there was a historical Jesus. And he's saying The original view must have been that Jesus became the Messiah at the resurrection. The secondary view, no, he had been the Messiah since the baptism. And how was Mark to harmonize two views? He sided with the view that said, all right, Jesus became the Messiah at his baptism. But he needs to explain in a charitable way how the other one could have come about so that it's not merely heresy. And so his harmonization is, Jesus was the Messiah, he was doing the works of the Messiah, and yet there were people that did not know it until the resurrection. How could that be? Well, though he was doing the work of the Messiah all along, he was keeping it hidden. He told people not to tell about it. He told the demons to be quiet, not to be who he was. He told the disciples, don't tell anybody about this meeting with Moses and Elijah on the mountaintop until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. Then you get quiet. But we don't want people to know until why. Well, Ray said it was simply an attempt at getting out of a tight spot, trying to say, well, if he's up there, he's declared superior to Moses and Elijah, who must he be? He must be the Messiah. I mean, the Elijah comes before the Messiah, and here he is doing it. But people didn't understand Jesus was the Messiah until Easter. Well, all right, they kept it a secret until Easter. And all the stuff you mentioned, Ray, is that was artificial. It's not that the tradition of Jesus having done this thing was artificial, though Ray understood that Mark was already so heavily theologized, you couldn't just assume anything of it happened, but he said it was already believed that Jesus had done these things, but it was the messianic character of it that had it suppressed. And for what reason? Well, none really. Ray didn't subscribe to this idea, which I think is equally artificial, that Jesus believed he was the Messiah, but used the term because everybody had a false definition of it. Well, if everybody defines it in certain ways, that it's in military conqueror when he isn't, I should say Jesus did. He was the Messiah. There's this hogwash about, oh yeah, he was the Messiah, if you don't mind redefining it 100%. What? Brady didn't think that. He's talking about what Christians did after Jesus. His view in no way demands that Jesus believed himself to be the Messiah. And I believe Bultmann accepted Brady's view. And I think it still holds up well as to Ray's and some other scholars have in defense of it. James Dunn and others, conservatives, predicted what we had to say of this, but I think I'll just give you one example of artificiality Ray pointed as if each one of them was not. I mean, it was some of them, like Jesus say, look, don't go telling everybody I killed you, but as it is, I can't even enter a city up without being thronged by crowds. So, that's just understandable. But how about the where he raised Jairus' daughter from the dead after kicking out a whole bunch of neighbors who are mourning, weeping because the kid is dead. And then he raises, says to the parents, see that no one knows about this. Oh, wait a minute. What are they supposed to hide in the house the rest of the life and tell everybody, oh yeah, she's coming, right? She's coming. Ray said, sure, this element has been added to the story. It doesn't make any sense as a description of something that happens, even a fiction of the script, right? It only makes sense as a theological editing device. And I think he's right about that. You could take, I guess what I'm saying here is that you could take these hiding elements, these silent elements that you rightly point out, and say it could mean something else. It didn't necessarily mean that you have an admission implicitly of myth hypothesis. That would kind of fit too. You're taking this in a very interesting direction. Because your theory just attacked the team bit, because it's obvious enough, you said well, that the evangelists were saying, well, nobody remembers there being historical Jesus for one reason. There wasn't one. So let's write a story in which there was. God explain why nobody seems to remember. I guess my only hesitation, and I like that. That's interesting. It seems to assume, Mark, that people know something about Jesus. It's a question of who it was. But I don't know. Maybe you're right. It's well worth thinking through. Keep up the good theologizing. You should write a book about that. We'll get to another question.
Ask your question at thebiblegeek.org.